Hello, everyone, and welcome to a ToB interlude. We are going to be reviewing Mortal Kombat today. As always, I'm Julian Mush. I'm joined by Daniel D'Souza and Jeremy Cozier.
Hello.
And a couple things I want to touch on before we start. It's the podcast anniversary today. Officially, we haven't. I don't think
actually today.
It's today. I have it in my calendar. I think it's 7 years. I think
Whoa.
it's 7. So it could also be 8. So just. If you're going back, I would say this all this time. We celebrate this anniversary, but that is not an excuse to go back and listen to any of the early episodes.
In fact, it's a reminder. Not
we actually need to do that. I feel like
you think we should go back and listen?
Dude, I don't have it in me, man.
just over like certain things, right? Like, disagreements or what we think we thought at one point.
Yeah. That does make sense, but it sounds like a lot of work, Jeremy. And
It's a lot of work, and it'd probably lead to more arguments.
We'll
right.
Yeah,
which
that too.
do we? I think we have enough. Like, I feel like this show has enough arguments as it is. So there's that. Also, it's Oscar Day. We just did our Oscar preview show last Sunday. So if you haven't, oh man, I guess this show's gonna come out after the Oscars though. So
this doesn't help you at all.
So you can go back and
Please be
listen
excited.
to our reviews. Me and Dan review all the Best Picture noms there. So if you are interested, you go watch the Oscars. Like, oh, that movie looks interesting. Watch them first. I guess we are full spoilers there too. So really, it's not going to provide you a lot of a lot of value, but it's there if you want to see it. That's the Oscars are on later today.
You guys didn't do like maybe like a minute of no spoilers and then go deep into it, or it was just like spoilers from the beginning? You think?
We're really bad. I think if anyone's been listening to the show long enough, they know that we're really bad at not spoiling things right at the beginning.
We just put it out at the top. Like, we're going to be spoiling these movies. It's hard to talk about them without spoiling them.
Some of them more than others, yeah.
Yeah, a couple of them have historical precedence, so it's like, okay, how is there really a spoiler for Trial of Chicago 7, right?
Yeah, but if you didn't know about those events, Anyway, so if you make your picks, or if you've made your picks, we want to hear how well you did, especially if you are part of the Patreon. Head over to the Discord. Let us know how you did. And, there's no official ToB ballot this year, but we hope to come back with one next year when the Oscars might be a little bit more exciting. No offense to the movies from this year. Okay, let's get into this. Now, I feel like the place we should start, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I think we should start, Dan, by setting the stage with like your and Jeremy's history with Mortal Kombat. Like, what's your... How long you've been a fan? What makes you such a big fan of it? And that, like, because I think the expectations that someone might carry into this movie might make a difference here.
I'd agree with that, and I'm happy to go into my history with Mortal Kombat. But I feel like this movie, more than many others, kind of relies upon audience expectations going into it.
You think so?
I think so. I think it kind of relies upon people being at least somewhat of a fan of Mortal Kombat. It's kind of hard to, I don't think the movie's very accessible if you have no background knowledge with the subject matter.
Well, this is directed by Simon McQuaid. Writers are Greg Russo and Dave Callahan, amongst others. I recall there being in the news, in the trades, I guess it's not really news, in the trades. That they were making this movie for the fans. This is for fans. This is for Mortal Kombat fans. This isn't just for Joe Schmo off the street, never Mortal Kombat before. Isn't going to come into this movie and be like, sweet, now like let me jump into MKX or whatever, the latest 11, the latest.
Yeah, one. And I think if you were to look at some advertising and some of the features on YouTube or whatever, like they themselves, even the director, kind of they talk about that and the attention to detail and just kind of really transitioning what gamers know of these characters and bring it to screen. So I think they had full on intent to make that happen.
Right. And
I think there's going to be a divide here in terms of if you enjoyed it or not. But I think Daniel might be a little bit off. I don't think there's too much depth here to where general audiences, they're going to come. They're expecting just to have fun, I think. So I think it does achieve that. I think what it boils down to is people like me, Dan and myself, is that we have a pretty deep knowledge, Dan more so than myself, and care for the subject matter. And I think it all boils down here to runtime, and that just isn't achievable. I think with the amount of time we have here,
they give runtime's hour and a half or at 150. So,
but it's probably an hour and a half with credits.
Well, I don't know if it's 20 minutes of credits, but
oh yeah, that's true.
It's somewhere in that kind of what I've been thinking recently is kind of a sweet spot for movies. There's certain movies with lots of lore like this one that could probably use a little bit extra time.
Definitely.
Especially in a first movie. That being said, I think a lot of movies, and we talked about this for a long time, could do to be in this kind of 140 to 210 range. But again, that's personal preference, I think. But I just think that we've talked about movies being too long for a long time. This movie certainly does not, have that as like a main critique, I think.
Yeah, quite the opposite, in fact.
Yeah, like if this was in the theater or whatever, and you go to the washroom, you come back, like we're gonna be somewhere.
You're completely lost.
Different.
You're completely lost, and not only that, you might be somewhere that looks a lot like a place you already were, but it's completely somewhere else.
And a lot of the time, it's like visually, obviously, kind of. I think it kind of nails it. You might have some gripes here and there, but it's just like you're along the ride, you're having fun here and there. But I just feel like from Dan and just based off myself and how we're kind of on the same level, like it just feels a little bit disappointing, or like come on, like just kind of go over that a bit more, or just so. Yeah, I don't know. Dan, am I kind of right there with that assessment?
I think maybe that's we're kind of saying the same thing from a different angle. Like I feel like if you aren't a fan, if you don't have that background with the lore, the movie, what I mean by being inaccessible.
Yeah, why would you care?
It moves so quickly and it just glosses over all the lore. Like the tournament is hardly even mentioned. Like
I love that the movie sets up this tournament and then like at the very, very end touches on it again.
Which is cool. Like what I like about it is that it's definitely, leading into a sequel. They want a franchise out of this, and I'm all for it. I'm on board because you're right, Jeremy, they got the look down. They have they actually do have
really good actors.
Down. They just the cast is great. The lore is there. It's just a very superficial first blush at it.
It's a sales pitch on kind of what this world is. So that's good, Julian. I'm just going to give your thoughts here, but I feel like that's kind of it's selling to someone like Julian, if that's fair.
I think there's coming as someone who's a bit more of an outsider to the franchise than you guys are. Obviously, I've known and Mortal Kombat's been a part of my life since I was a kid, but not in the same way that it has for you guys. I've never really cared for the characters and the lore or the games, because fighting games have always been something gameplay itself has never been something that I've been like really into. So I think this movie does kind of fail as being like a appetizer for what Mortal Kombat's supposed to be. I don't think it does the job. If that's what it's trying to do, which I'm not even sure if that's what it's even trying to do. And I think what maybe you guys are touching on is that because you have so much knowledge of the lore and the world, you can see pieces where, if you had just done this differently, it could have been so much better. Or
exactly.
If instead of this you did that, I feel like that would have been, and not because you want to see those things, but because you think that would have made it a more accessible movie for like general audiences, I think.
Or done a certain character more justice.
Right. Yeah. Or both. Yeah, because you maybe want to see those things anyway. I mean, and
that translates to me. It just translates to like basically no weight behind anything that's happening, or like the fights especially.
Yeah.
And you basically know the outcome of the fight. But if it's trying to subvert your expectations, it's just like quickly just turns to the opposite.
Right.
And it's just not really satisfying in that way.
There's a lot of questions around like how much does death really even matter in this movie? I don't think it doesn't seem to carry a lot of weight right from the beginning. I also, by the way, I don't know if they nailed the look. There's every time they do the live action, the ninjas are the coolest looking characters in the game. I always feel like they're too busy, like visually busy, and like bulky, and not the like the sleek ninja look that you expect from an actual ninja. Every time I've ever seen it done more realistic, I feel like
this
that.
one, because I mean, like,
including
we're looking
in this
at a picture from the IMDb of Scorpion there, and it's like very kind of samurai ninja hybrid style. But both in that final fight, at least, both Scorpion and Sub-Zero, while I'll agree that they're bulky, they're still able to move around, and they do have the choreography done well here.
So that's the thing. So you mentioned this. This did not come out as like I would have noticed certain things for sure, but like you mentioned that there's an early fight. Well, maybe not early. It's about halfway through the movie. That you're like all that choreography is like straight from the game, and I thought like, okay, in retrospect, I'd want to rewatch that scene and look for that because I feel like that's really interesting. But that didn't jump out at me as something that was like obvious as a non Mortal Kombat fan. Or is not a person who played the games a lot.
And it's not meant to be. That's meant to be a subtle nod, right? I think it's seamless in the way that they blend the special moves from the character. I'm thinking of Kung Lao specifically, the way that he twirls around.
Well,
and
he does
like
that one like hat like jab move, that like a diagonal jab move twice, and it looks exactly the same twice, which does make it look like a video game. That stood out to me.
It's that and the teleporting and stuff, and the way that he uses his hat kind of like Captain America's shield, right? Like they make that work, but it doesn't look like it's not so static as in the video games, like a character responding to a button.
Sure, and I think one thing I would like to avoid is trying to nitpick this movie too much, because it is ultimately like pretty ridiculous. Like everything that happens in this movie is like, even the lore itself is pretty crazy.
Of course, yeah.
Like, and that's so we talked about this this concept, Dan. You really weren't a fan, it seemed like, of this. What do they call it in the movie? They're like their chi. Basically,
yeah. Well, they actually should have called it their chi. That would have that would have been in keeping with the pre-existing lore.
Right.
But
so
they call
the way how they tap into their kind of
special
superpower.
Their arcana is what they call it in this.
So this is, and there's no precedent for this concept in Mortal Kombat.
I mean, there's sorcerers, right? So like that implies that there are arcane arts, and like studying the arcane arts is a thing. But the term arcana is never used for fireballs and stuff in Mortal Kombat. Like that, at least.
So okay,
I understand like that we're gonna dissect this, but just quick, I think it works just in terms of the question we've always had of like, how do they like stand a chance, like in terms of the mortals and whatnot. Like it kind of fast forwards and gets everyone on like an even playing field. But like when you think about how they can kind of flesh that out, it just felt too quick and kind of unearned.
It's
you know what I mean?
And
you're kind of like,
it's very convenient.
Yeah, very MacGuffin-y. Some of them are really good, but like with Jax, it just didn't work for me.
The Jax one is the funniest one. By
it's
the way,
like you have mechanical arms, but they're just not good, and then they become really good.
Yeah.
So that is just brutal for me.
Because was his Arcana always having metal arms? Was that always gonna, like, if he had discovered that without
like who knows? I guess the idea is like, because you read it like you read like mutant powers, right? They just kind of show up in a moment of need, so it's kind of like whatever you need for that situation.
I have brought this specific, speaking of mutant powers, I've brought up this specific mutant powers reference before on the show. It's always it sticks out in my mind because it is so stupid, but it really reminds me of Jax here, because in the X-Men cartoon in the 90s, there was a mutant, I can never remember their name, one of the early episodes, like first 5 episodes, and their superpower was to be able to manipulate their wheelchair. Like they could, like, their wheelchair became a transformer. It could basically do anything, but that was their mutant power, which made no sense. I was like, even at like a young age, I'm like, I can buy Storm somehow, but I can't buy that this guy who's a paraplegic can just control manipulate the atoms within his wheelchair to just be anything that they want, which they don't even explain it that way. I just assume that that's how it works, which is like here the same thing. Oh, your superpower is just better metal arms. So it's like, it is just equally as silly. I don't know.
And then if we want to quickly just kind of reference the first movie, or maybe even the games, like in terms of how they kind of unlock, like it's like the animality in the second movie. Right, where he kind of goes through a training method with Nightwolf. And to me, that just immediately came to my mind because, you're watching this movie, but it's just flying by and they're just like, they're getting these things, but they just never felt like there was time to really understand or know who the person that they're showing is. And like, especially with like Shang Tsung, it's like, there was never really any good dialogue or
he's barely in
time. It's just like he's literally just standing there looking kind of ridiculous as the villain, and then he does his video game villain thing at the end to a character who had zero time kind of whatsoever to do stuff, but he did some really cool stuff. Some like when you talk about the teleportation move, it's like that brief like second is like, if we could just explode from there, go along with that
feeling,
we would just have this amazing world. So again, when you talk about nitpicking, I think it's going to come up, but I don't think we're going to focus on it too much because we understand what this is, and we even know that they've kind of signed on for, I think, at least 4 more, especially in Sub-Zero's case, because he mentioned that, I think, in an interview.
4 more,
which
that's like
which would lend to his kind of character transformation. In terms of Nuke Saibot.
Let's not get into that yet. I would say, and I just want to jump off what you said there before, Jeremy. You were speaking to like character and motivation and like just like basic movie elements, you know. And I think this movie kind of fails at some of those core, just like basic asks from a movie to make it like coherent and understood, and like you're never emotional. You never emotionally connect with any character in this movie. They all feel very hollow. Their motivations are
do we need to though to have fun?
I think you do, because if you don't care about any of the characters, why do you care about them fighting? This is the same thing with you know, the Transformers movies. Like, if you don't connect with any of the characters, you know, what's the point of even being here? You know, like, is it just
there's the opening scene with Scorpion, you know, before he's Scorpion, essentially, like with his family and
that's
stuff.
That's one of the best parts of the movie.
Yeah. And that really sets up the tone, and to a degree how serious they're, you know, it seems to be taking it.
Well, yeah.
You know, but then it just kind of goes away.
Well, and I think if they had stayed a little bit truer to that initial tone, maybe the first 45 minutes of the movie, 30 minutes of the movie.
Honestly, the first half of the movie is very strong, and then it just, because it's so busy, because they try to introduce so many characters at once, it just goes off the rails from there. Yeah,
so I guess let's touch on that for a second. What do we? I guess not maybe we, you guys specifically, because I'm not as attached to the characters as you guys are. What did you feel about the character selection here? They have a wide swath of characters to choose from. They chose specific ones, which, you know, some were surprise to me. You know, others, you know, I'm familiar with. There's that dude with the giant hammer who's barely in the movie.
Rico.
I'm like, who the hell's this guy? There's a vampire lady. I'm like, who's this? Like, I feel like maybe if we kind of maybe started with a more traditional cast of characters and then expanded out.
Here's the challenge. Just to speak to that, the challenge is that it is Mortal Kombat, so you have to kill people off. And you want to use characters from the game, so they have to have throwaway characters. And Rico and Natara, in the grand scheme of things, in terms of the lore of the games, they don't play a huge part. So it's fine for them to be throwaway characters, but you can do a better job than what they did with Natara. She's hardly on screen. Neither of them, I think, have any sort of speaking role. I think they're just grunts.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah. I mean, like, but even Shang Tsung, like you guys, like, he's in the movie, and that's obviously makes perfect sense. But you don't even understand his like motivation. Like, my traditional understanding of Mortal Kombat is that Shang Tsung works for somebody else generally.
Yeah, but I mean, his is pretty. I think they do a decent enough job explaining his. Like, it's the Mortal Kombat tournament has happened 9 times.
Yeah, and he wants to win. And he wants to win the lot. Yeah, exactly.
And it starts the first time we meet him. He says we're going to assassinate their heroes. I think that's like it's good enough for this type of movie.
I suppose.
So essentially, it's a prequel. This movie.
Yeah. The first thing I said to Dan. We were watching it. Dan was watching it for the second time, and they said, you know, they set basically the plot of the movie is we need to take out their heroes before the tournament. I'm like, well, that seems like a bit of a loophole in this whole tournament structure. So, like, right from the get-go, I'm like, I knew enough about Mortal Kombat to be like, something doesn't feel right here.
Playing a little loose with those rules.
Yeah. Because then, like, and I think a part of that is like, I was thinking about this movie for a while. Like, I knew we were going to review it, and I was thinking this movie makes a lot of unforced errors, which is a baseball reference. But it's like it makes mistakes that don't have to be there. Like, they had the tools and ability to make better decisions, but don't, you know?
Because it's always in favor of the runtime, so you got to cut stuff and humor, and it has to shove humor in there.
Yeah.
There's only one funny character in this movie.
And I feel like for us, it's just every time it happens, it's so like, it's almost like you're wasting your time and, you know, doing that, because, you know, it just doesn't work. Like with Jax, like with the humor when he's fighting, it's like it doesn't work.
Well, Jax,
it's Kano. It's just Kano, right? Like it's unanimous that he's the great humor, because his delivery is great, but it's always just over the top kind of swearing, just like kind of nonsense. Whatever.
He stands out as being I think one of the better, like, the bright spots of the movie, because, you know, from Dan's telling me, like, they nailed the characterization, which I think is important, but also just on his own, really funny, really big and loud. And, like, for a movie like this, characters that are big and loud are going to draw attention. Like, that's the kind of movie that this is. So, like, there's the other heroes, the other Earth Realm heroes are not that exciting. Like, they're not that interesting. Like, they're like, you have a hard time really caring about like even Sonya, who has like I think a fairly large role in this movie, is like, what is she doing? Like, why is she there?
She's just straight to the
world,
point,
right?
and she knows the assignment, right? Like that's like the common meme these days, right? And she does it good, but it's just like, and then when you compare it to the first movie, right, which I know a lot of people aren't a fan of, but like you get a brilliant sequence where it shows Jax and Sonya in their element, you know, as a team doing what they, which is, you know, raiding the place essentially, and seeking out Kano, and like that little mini movie essentially, or scene or whatever, just gives you everything you need to know.
Yeah.
You know, and especially with their interactions. But I feel with Kano, like it's just, he's well written in terms of as a plot device too, and his characterization. Like it's cool seeing him, you know, not a bad guy, you know, essentially at first, and then like making that transition, like that all fits.
So I guess the biggest kind of the elephant in the room regarding characters is Cole Young. By the way, if anyone, I would have paid anyone $50 to tell me what the last name of that character was.
Yeah,
It's Cole, and he's generic MMA fighter dude, and I think this is one of the most obvious kind of unforced errors in this movie, because they set him up as this interesting kind of like, okay, he's kind of got the soul of Scorpion in him or something. It keeps flashing to this like this kind of like Eye of Sauron kind of thing going on. I'm like, okay, I'm into this. This is kind of cool. He's obviously eventually going to become Scorpion. I think most people thought that, and I don't.
Yeah, I think we all assumed that his Arcana was going to be Scorpion taking control of his body or something like that.
Right, and like, and then having some sort of like, you know, they have some sort of spiritual conversation in like in some sort of other realm. They go to, by the way, the void, Dan. I think.
Yeah. Oh, that's the worst part of the movie.
Why do they go there? There's so many different places they could go.
Listen,
that part is a perfect example of what's wrong with the movie. You know what I mean? Like it's purely exposition.
Yeah.
And just so poorly written. So poorly written and just so obvious. Like it's basically like, you know, what do we do? Like we need to fight, and it just like expands from there. It's just brutal.
There's an amazing line there when someone asks Raiden, so you can transport anybody to anywhere, right? And I looked at Dan, I was like, so obviously you just transport them all into a volcano or something, right? Like you just like drop them into the bottom of the ocean or something. But I know that doesn't make a good movie, but if you include the line, transport anybody to anywhere, it automatically asks you to ask questions.
Raiden can't break the rules of Mortal Kombat and attack them. That's why he's not doing it.
No, he's not. The loophole. He's not attacking them. He's just transporting them.
But they even mention how, like, you know, they're not going to break the rules. So it's like it's fine that Shang Tsung can break the rules whenever he wants.
That's weird too. Okay, so anyway, let's go back to Cole Young for a second. I think they included this character as trying to be like an audience surrogate, right?
Yeah, they voiced that, I think, in some videos leading up.
And I'm like,
they've expressed they know there's a, you know, just a wide, you know, variety of characters to choose from. But keeping in mind, they also have talked about how like they've looked at the MCU guide in making this first movie.
Yeah,
so
it feels like it.
Yeah,
which is weird because those movies are like a soft PG-13, I would say, and this is going for a hard R. And like, I feel like it's hard to blend those styles if you're going for a hard R, but your tone is PG-13, you know, like then it just feels gore for the sake of gore, and it's like what's even, I don't know. I know, and to be fair, there is gore for the sake of gore in this movie, and it's like understandable because of the subject matter and like the source material. But
I thought there'd be more, to be honest.
I was surprised because it took so long to get to the really gory stuff. I think we didn't really get anything that gory until.
Like, I don't know. Again, like you go back to that first scene with Hanzo back in 16, whatever.
Right.
That scene, there was a ton of violence. Not as much of the gore, I guess, like beheadings and stuff like that. But there was a ton of violence there, and that I thought was setting the tone for the movie, and I was amped up.
Well, that felt more like real type of. That felt more like natural violence. Like he got stabbed through the chest, and then like the knife like pulls up, and like there's a big gash, and like that's like, okay, that's hardcore. You know?
It was like this natural violence filmed properly, but also showcasing like the physics of his weapon. And you obviously know it's exaggerated, but it just kind of made sense. It was pretty well done.
So,
but then also attention to detail. Like you look at at like Sub-Zero and stuff, and like his skin is like frostbit
Uh-huh.
and stuff, right? And there's like rust on like parts of his mask and all and those types of things. So that stuff can be kind of hard to see or appreciate, but I'm just kind of giving a shout out to that. I
Well,
think
yeah, I
those
think
elements are pretty cool.
it's important to
And
nod
Sub-Zero
to
was
the
done
good
very
parts.
well, I think, here as a villain.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think his powers are really cool. I like the way that they show his powers are pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, they actually get very creative with it.
Yeah.
You're right, Jeremy. In terms of attention to detail, what they do with the ice, how it affects the environment.
Mhm.
You know, I'm thinking
Yeah.
specifically a scene where he's in an alley and he
Like,
runs away.
right,
and,
goes,
the mist sort of follows
Yeah,
him. Like
that is
that was
cool.
a nice touch, right?
Yeah.
They do a great job with that kind of stuff. And yeah, so I guess you would say Sub-Zero is the main villain of this movie of one, and
Sure.
then Shang Tsung will be the main villain of the next, right? So I think he was very effective in that sense. Sub-Zero specifically.
I don't know how much COVID affected the making of this movie, but I think what we're seeing now in not just some of the movies that are coming out that have been delayed or were being filmed during COVID, but shows like Falcon and the Winter Soldier, WandaVision, both of them were filmed, had to change and adjust to filming when COVID started. And I think it had a material net negative effect on those shows. It forced them to do things that they didn't necessarily want to do, but they were forced their hand. I think that's the scenario here, especially with the third act of this movie. I don't know for sure, but I get the impression that they were limited in a lot of ways by what they could do, and maybe part of it is budget, because they do like the big final showdown happening in like a gym, like a backlot set, is a little bit like, this doesn't really feel like Mortal Kombat. Like you were literally on that bridge with the spikes underneath, and we're like, we're not going to do that. We're going to go to this other place that's not nearly as visually interesting, and just across the board, I think this movie is visually bland from a set perspective. Like the places they go, I was saying this during the movie, the places they go on Earth and in the other realms look the same, and it's like they couldn't do anything to make Earthrealm feel different than Netherrealm, like not Netherrealm, I guess, Outworld. Like Outworld and where they are on Earth, these desert locations feel exactly the same, and it's like, I get that you guys probably filmed them in the same desert, but that's not my problem, like. Sure. So
yeah, there's some good wide shots of like some real areas and whatnot, but again, comparing it to the first movie, right? Like they had practical like sets, that a lot of craftsmanship, a lot of detail, and real locations with like just unique settings. And
the island is so cool.
Like the island was which they had an actual tournament type feel there as well. So here it just feels like they're cheating when they're just like kind of walking in these environments and they just fight a little bit, and then you have this opportunity to showcase these other realms, specifically Outworld, and we just get this kind of cool like bridge throne type area, which is I was excited when you see Sub-Zero walking down it, and you learn a little bit there, and you learn that he's embracing that role. You know what I mean? Because they're talking about their real names and stuff, because we're gonna get different versions of these characters at some point. So I love the attention to detail there. But yeah, I agree. It doesn't look as good in terms of the environments.
Yeah, and it's probably a good example of one of those unforced errors that you keep referencing, right? It's like, yes, that is actually the right look for Outworld.
Sure.
Why is that the look for Raiden Sky Temple?
I don't know.
Like that has nothing to do with the like that could have been somewhere else on Earth, and you would have solved this problem perfectly.
It could be literally anywhere on Earth, and they chose a desert, which is it's like and by the way, that Sky Temple set has this weird. I pointed out to Dan while watching the movie. Has this weird ass has like a I don't even know what you call it, like a sci-fi prop just sitting in the middle of a cave,
like a centerpiece.
I don't know,
in the middle of the cave floor, and it's like this tiered sort of laser thing. I have no idea what it does. They never talk about it in the movie. It's just there.
It just sits there.
It has no business being there, but it's there.
I was like, what is that thing? And you're like, Dan, it's like, oh, it's the thing that's like making the shield. I'm like, I don't think it's
some sort of like electrical conduit.
Yeah, like I don't think it is, because Kano breaks that statue later, and that's the thing that was making the shield. So I don't know. It's weird choices like that, and that's, for the record, definitely a nitpick. I just thought it was pretty funny. So what did we think of the actual fight scenes themselves? I think, sure, we can argue about whether or not it makes sense for them, like the way that the staging for the fights, or like why they're fighting, especially that during that montage where a bunch of them are fighting different people, doesn't necessarily hold up. Like it's like I just
Mhm.
teleport anybody anywhere. Okay, sure, fair enough. Easily solved. If you'd actually done the tournament setting, it makes it a lot easier to set up the actual fights. But neither here nor there. The fights as they are. Did you like them? Was there anyone that stands out as being particularly great or particularly bad? Dan?
Oh no, I mean I love them aside from the ones that I mentioned earlier. The way that they kind of like they effectively don't use Natara. They like the thing you have to remember with these fighters is that it has to be about combat itself. It has to be about the fighting.
Right. Combat with a K.
And I think that's what they missed the mark on in terms of that specific fight. Otherwise, though, the choreography was great. I think the fights were probably the best part of the movie, or one of. Specifically between Scorpion and Sub-Zero, they put the most into that, of course. But even the other ones, like Sonya Molina, for example, Liu Kang, Cabal, you can forget.
Yeah, so you like Cabal. I know that you like Cabal as a character in the video games because I've seen you play as Cabal in the games before. I feel like you have. Maybe no,
not
maybe
one
not.
Of my characters.
Anyway, I thought Cabal looked cool until he opened his mouth and started speaking.
Sure.
He had the stupidest voice. No offense to the guy who plays Cabal, Daniel Nelson, but I just think it's like the most lame ass voice they
just
could have
went
picked.
with like a gangster archetype, right? That's all Cabal really is. For a movie like this, again, he's a throwaway character. They just needed somebody for Liu Kang to beat.
Well, he also turns Kano. There's that scene with Kano and him, and I'm like, that is like, man, I like Kano's. The actor who's playing Kano is Josh Lawson, and he's really good. But that scene is not very good, and I mostly blame that on the Cabal inclusion. But back to the fighting, I just like, you're right. I really liked when they were just training. Like I feel like that was like the best part of the whole movie for me. Like that middle section where they're like trying to figure out what their arcana is or whatever, and they're just getting their asses kicked by Liu Kang and stuff. I think that's fun. Because it's like less stakes, but because the movie already feels like it has low stakes, it feels more in tune with the movie.
Sure.
And it's cool. And it's cool having Liu Kang and Kung Lao, right? Like Shaolin, stuff, like just already being there. You know what I mean? Like I think that was refreshing to see. And we get that really sick shot of Liu Kang just like completely ripped.
Yeah, I was like, how is that possible?
Like that's what I'm talking about. That's Mortal Kombat right there.
Right,
exactly, and that is very rewarding for somebody as a fan, right? Because or even the shot of Liu Kang walking towards them and with the sun setting behind him. He is the hero of the game series, right? And we know that as fans. That's a perfect like hero shot. But maybe the average moviegoer doesn't know that, and that's just an interesting shot, right?
Yeah,
I think they got that right in terms of.
And then you look at the first movie, right? It was like a journey for him to figure out his kind of extra power, right? With like, I think he busted out the fire kind of punches or whatever, right? With at the very end.
So
that movie.
And I think that he's much more. I guess I don't have. You guys have a better recollection of the actual original movie. But this movie really truly feels like an ensemble. Like there's no main character to this movie, and maybe to its detriment. Like there's no one person you can latch onto here.
Well, I think that was one of the most intriguing things going into the movie. Is like, yes, you're right. They're introducing Cole Young, and he's marketed as the main character.
Yeah, but he's not.
Right, and so you have that storyline, but then you know that there's Sonya Jackson, you know that Liu Kang's in the movie, Shang Tsung's in the movie, then you know that there's this Scorpion Sub-Zero thing, and you're like, what's the A story? Which one is going to be the focal point of the movie?
They didn't really choose one,
and I think you're right to its detriment. It's kind of wavering between them a little bit. And the Cole Young one, as much I think it's great to introduce a new character, and you do need an audience surrogate for a movie like this. His story is
also his arcana is just he's like he gets armor now. Yeah. So here's the real question for Cole: will he be in the next Mortal Kombat game?
I don't know.
Game?
Probably.
I bet you there is. I bet you they do.
Yeah, I mean, NetherRealm. Like I'm sure Ed Boon is close on this kind of stuff, so I feel like they would bring Cole in definitely at the very least as a skin.
Because here's what happens if you don't. It keeps this character, which is already a tough sell to Mortal Kombat fans, it keeps him outside, like in the cold, as a kind of at least a way to say, hey, we endorse this movie, we believe in it, we're gonna bring this character into the game. I feel like that's an easy olive branch to extend across those like media bridge.
Maybe not, right? Because there's something to be said about the separation too. Like we talk about with DC Marvel comics all the time, how we can have the comics as one story and the movies as another, and you don't need that crossover.
Maybe
right?
it's a DLC character.
So I think a prospect like that depends more on what their plans are for the next Mortal Kombat game than it does on the character's popularity.
That's true. And they've already rebooted the franchise a bunch of times in the game series. So it's like, how many more times can you do that? You probably couldn't. You'd have to introduce him, and his backstory in the games would probably be different than his backstory in the movies. It's already then it gets confusing.
But it's a fair question, and you're right. It's probably like at the very least DLC or as a skin, he'll be a feature in the games.
So I really liked Scorpion, the Hiroyuki Sanada performance.
Yep.
I think he's really, really cool. It's just I feel like it's such a shame that we get so little of him in the movie. You know, it's another kind of like
sequels.
Subplot where I'm also not clear. So he freed him from hell, but cool line. I came from hell to kill you or whatever. Cool line, but it's not clear. So is he now? He can now just move about as he wishes now.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, it's not clear how much this is going to follow the original storyline, right? Because they didn't talk about Quan Chi at all within this movie.
Right.
However, we do see Shinnok's amulet, which Quan Chi steals at one point. Kano tries to steal Shinnok's amulet within the movie. So when Scorpion's brought back, Quan Chi is the one who brings him back, and there's a period where Scorpion works for Quan Chi, and the same happens for Sub-Zero. So obviously, Louis Tan is going to be back in the later movies.
Yeah.
Stumbling between movies and video games. Because I mean, I hope this isn't a spoiler for anybody. If you know anything about Mortal Kombat, you'll know that the original Sub-Zero comes back later as Noob Saibot.
Right.
And he even in the last fight takes off all his armor that you were referencing earlier, and he's all black and he looks much more like the Noob Saibot look.
Right. Which is cooler.
And they go to the lengths of referring to him as Bihan. So
yeah.
Right. Well, no, they go to the lengths of making sure that you don't call him Bihan because he's Sub-Zero now.
Yeah,
right?
but you're aware.
Yeah. So Dan, you mentioned not being able to you keep stumbling on the video game movie thing. Generally speaking, just broadly speaking, how do we feel about this as an adaptation of a video game? We've had a long history of different types of video games trying to be made into movies, and most of them have failed. They've been largely bad.
Yeah.
Where do we stand on this as an adaptation of Mortal Kombat 2 film as a video game? Like, do you think it captures those same elements?
Jeremy?
Yeah, I just think it's extremely surface level in terms of the elements, which is, you know, it's up to the eye of the beholder, right, to see if that's a success or not. And yeah, I just want to see more. It just really comes down to the point that this is essentially a prequel, and you know, just a really short runtime. But again, if you don't really care too much, you know, the video game is violent, has cool fights, and looks cool.
Right.
I mean, it adapts that. You know, pretty good, I guess.
Yeah, I think we all kind of come down on this movie isn't a very good movie.
Well, that's the thing, like what you were saying earlier. It doesn't fail on the Mortal Kombat side of things. It fails on the movie side of things.
Right.
It's just not a good Hollywood movie.
So it's like, so I guess the short answer, it feels
it's,
like to
it,
me,
it
is
comes
like
to
it's a bad adaptation because it doesn't, although it does a good job of touching on the stuff that the game is doing, it doesn't make it into an interesting movie, or at least as interesting as it could be, which I think that's probably true most of the video game adaptations. It's like they touch on some of the stuff that people like in the games, but maybe to the detriment of it as a film, except for Sonic the Hedgehog, which does touches almost nothing from the video games, and it basically uses the look and style of Sonic to tell a completely different story. So, I mean, I'm not necessarily saying that's a better movie. I'm just saying that's
what is the story of Sonic in the video game?
He's trying to free his friends. They were all taken captives and turned into robots.
Yeah, that's not the story of the game or the movie. Sorry. Yeah. Is that the story for the game? All
of his friends from the
but
Green
all the
Hill Zone,
time.
all the
Like,
little,
is it all the
every time
in Sonic 2? And
it progresses, but he's going after Dr. Eggman or Dr.
Right.
Robotnik because he's taken all the little critters and made them into robots.
Okay.
That's why when you jump on them, all the little buttons come out.
Yeah. You're right. It's convenient that all you have to do is jump on their head and they go back to not being a robot.
Poor design, really.
Yeah. Anything else you guys want to touch on with this movie? I don't know, like in terms of like cool nods to the, speaking of, touching on Mortal Kombat stuff, cool nods to the games or Easter eggs that jumped out at you?
There's a few, but it's really, again, like there's a theme here. Like everything else we've been talking about, it's very superficial. So there's a moment right at the beginning when Sonya and Cole are in that cargo container area.
Right.
And they have like a news clipping that has a picture of Nightwolf and one that has a picture of Kotal Khan. And that's kind of more or less it. Other than that, they kind of keep the references to what's going on within the movie.
Right.
Outside of the tournament.
Well, that and you mentioned the amulet, the Shinnok's amulet.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Which is that. I would definitely not have noticed or known that's what that was.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited that there's going to be sequels. I feel like Raiden was a wasted character. I feel like there's a lot that was left on the cutting room floor, and
Raiden's not really in this movie at all.
He just shows up when it's most convenient to teleport somebody, to use some sort of power that is a game changer that just stops all the action.
But he's also not allowed to interfere, even though everyone else is interfering. It's like it just it's messy.
It's unfortunate, and I really do feel like that was edited out. They just cut Raiden scenes. They cut probably Melina scenes as well, because Melina.
Yeah, some people, some actors have been vocal about some fights that didn't make it into the movie and this and that, and like maybe it'll be on the special features. So I think there was probably a lot cut here for some reason.
Well, yeah, I think and maybe it's a runtime thing. I don't know. Here's the problem also with this movie coming out. This is a movie coming out at this time on HBO Max and not really coming out in the theaters. Is we're not really going to get a true sense of how well this movie does. We've touched on this on the podcast before. I'm guessing that Warner Brothers, based on what we've kind of heard from them, is that they're willing to write off some of this stuff from this year. And not be like, well, Mortal Kombat didn't do what we wanted, so we're not going to make a sequel. Like, I would be shocked if that happened, right? Because I think it seems clear that they want to double down on Mortal Kombat. They made that animated movie last year, which was the first of those.
Because, sorry to interrupt, but because Mortal Kombat does at least show, like, it has the potential to be one of these cinematic universes. It has enough depth in terms of, like, the roster of characters and the lore. I know it's silly, but it at least has enough of it thought out that they can really develop it. And I think that's what they're trying to do here.
Right, and like, just quickly touching on that silly thing and coming back to the Arcana, we were saying after we watched the movie, it's like it was obviously just a tool to make the ridiculousness make some sense. Like, even in the most superficial, like one line of dialogue way, okay, this can make it a little bit more sense now. Right?
Because you are dealing with people from Earth, and it's like, how are their fireballs? How are they surviving fireballs? And
it doesn't make any sense. Exactly, it makes no sense at all. It's like in Injustice, where they all have that like superhero serum or whatever. It's like they have to make a acknowledgement of it, and then we can move on. So I'm mostly okay with that. I think this movie, although it's called Mortal Kombat, does not have the actual tournament in it. The next movie, if you can actually do the tournament and do it like with some grandeur and some scale, I think will be really exciting and have some actual stakes. By the way, like
sure, and how cool is it going to be? Because you'll be revisiting Shang Tsung, and now we'll have a history with these characters. Now there is added drama, right? You saw in the movie both Sub-Zero and Goro's bodies being taken to the Netherrealm, presumably to be brought back as revenants. They're going to be in the next tournament,
presumably.
Well,
we all know that.
That's what they do.
Liu Kang kept his hat thing, so
they
didn't just like get rid of him completely.
That's going to be the big drama, right? Maybe Kung Lao is coming back as a revenant, because that's prevalent in the games already, and then Liu Kang has to face Kung Lao in the tournament, something like that. Like, that's easy added drama right there.
Yeah,
that makes the sequel much more worthwhile.
Well, and then obviously again, then you have there's something from a character standpoint that you could connect with.
Yeah, exactly.
Where there's not really a lot of that here. So it's like maybe this is kind of like the necessary evil, so you can have that background into the actual tournament.
I think so. I mean, they're gonna make it a bigger budget. They're gonna go in there knowing that they're gonna have a cast of characters, a bigger cast, kind of probably piggybacking off of the idea like the Suicide Squad, right? You have this massive cast, but we know that a bunch of them are gonna die, so that can also be a part of knowing that. But then again, subverting expectations. There's a matchup one day, this crazy thing happens. There's maybe some cheating behind the scenes. We get the actual like one-for-one copy of probably the environments or the levels that we know from the games, which would be really cool. So yeah, this is definitely I just chalk this up as a prequel. It's cool to see all these actors kind of bring their take and the care they put on the look and all that stuff. But yeah, the next movie, if it's like a big tournament and all the major players are set, I think it could be really good.
Hey, I just remembered this one thing. What did you guys think of the or the reptile sequence? It's very reminiscent of the original, the first movie.
Very forgettable. But it's not necessarily the same reptile as the reptile from the games.
No, I'm not saying that has to be the reptile, but it just seems like what they went with is that's the style of reptile we're going to use for when we actually do this. If they do that, which is again, I don't know how that works in terms of keeping with the lore.
It works. Like the reptile was always a reptile under the ninja costume.
Right. He certainly looks a lot better than the one from the original movie.
He just also progressively gets more and more reptilian as it goes. Part of that's because the Dragon King egg does something I don't remember.
So you're losing me.
Yeah, that's
and they just started to differentiate the looks of all the ninjas too, rather than just
of course that's what it came from. But it's explained within the lore that he's like some sort of disease is making him become more and more reptilian.
Okay. I would like to see it like a very, maybe it's silly, but like for the ninja costumes, especially for like a sequel, like if you have a Scorpion versus Sub-Zero, a new Sub-Zero again, for instance, like to like a style that's very inspired traditional, like original Mortal Kombat look. That's like a little bit more toned down. I think that would be cool with like a little bit more of the shoulders and stuff like that.
That's what you want, is that more simplistic kind of just the first iteration of the ninja looks, at least at some point in the movie.
Mask always looks so bulky. I think we can do a little bit more of a sleeker mask.
It's so tough. I don't know how, like I'm not an expert at these kind of things, but it's got to be tough to make it like look great and still be functional.
Yeah, I don't know.
And not be heavy.
But like also we can make older actors look like younger actors. We can't make cool CG looking. They don't have to look like CG, but I'm just saying like the technology's there. I feel like we can do it. But like for me, like the look of Sub-Zero in this movie was good, except for his mask, which would look too.
Well, it's just that, like you can see like the space between the cheeks. Right?
Yeah,
that's what it is. It's kind of, it looks like it doesn't fit right.
Right. Like we all know that Spider-Man's eyes don't supposed to like go up and down and get bigger because it's just a mask. But when they introduced that concept in when did they introduce that one? Homecoming. Yeah, it's like we were all fine with it. It's like okay, it's from the comics. We don't, and they even do a one-line explanation.
They explained why they do it.
I think they explain the tech, not why they have the tech. It doesn't make any sense in a real-world setting, but it doesn't matter because it's a lot closer to what we it hits those.
And this would be the prime example of a nitpick too.
Yeah, I would absolutely it is. I'm nitpicking.
But just to give credit to these masks, I think the Sub-Zero one in particular, I just think there's just so much detail and craftsmanship in the actual mask and just detail that kind of represents where he comes from or the Lin Kuei or whatever. And I just like the kind of depth they put in on that. And I think maybe that's why it is so big, just to kind of so you can kind of just see it. It's not like just like thrown away, because like the first movie or whatever, the games, there's not much going on there. It's just there to look cool.
Yeah.
Which is, I think this does it as well, but like there's a lot of intricate details in his mask in particular, which I like.
And then I guess staying on the ninjas for a second, there's this kind of element of Chinese versus Japanese stuff going on here. And at first I was like, this is silly the way that they were doing it, where it was like, here's a subtitle, but also to specify this is Japanese and this is Chinese. And I know why they did it. It's like they have to differentiate it. I just feel like that's a clunky way of doing it. I like the idea of it though. I like the concept. I don't know if I love the execution. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean. I don't know how else.
I don't know.
What else are you supposed to do? Yeah.
I think maybe you do it in a more like because the way it's being done now is really, it like takes you out of the movie. Like, hey, be aware that this is Chinese and this is Japanese, because it doesn't happen anywhere else in the movie. They're calling attention to the subtitles there, where I feel like you can maybe do it through dialogue and through
you need more
through the
characters
story
in the scene to express it, I guess.
You may not understand me right now, but
right. So I'm not saying it has to be that clunky. I'm just saying
like, I don't know what you're saying, but F you, pal.
Yeah. even that works better than I feel like what they did. But so again, that's definitely also a nitpick because I like the concept there, and it's not really explored that I feel like that often, especially in like Western film. And that's another thing here. I think the casting is really spot on, which is like, hey, there's all these like Asian inspired characters that we have, and instead of casting a bunch of white people in those roles, we're gonna cast Asian people. What a concept!
It just makes sense.
So that's good. So I'll leave you guys. We'll wrap up on this question. Okay, we can all agree that the first original film is a cult classic, right? It's something that we all know is bad, but it's popular. It has certain like standout moments that are good, and it was like ahead of its time. It was a video game adaptation really early on, right? And and there's some charms of it that are beyond, that are kind of like intangibles, that make it that cult classic. Does this movie have the ability to have those same legs, let's fast forward 20 years. I don't even know how long. How many years has it been since the last Mortal Kombat?
95.
It's been a while.
Almost, yeah.
So it's like, let's fast forward another 25 years. And does this movie have any cult following at all, or is it just kind of forgotten and left behind? What do you guys think? It's hard to say. It's obviously hard to say. We're speculating here, but
I mean, from my perspective, it feels like this movie is more likely to be one of the ones that gets kind of like lost in the wash, so to speak. But that is so dependent on the times themselves that it's really hard to say. I mean, this movie has a lot of heart. I feel like the other one has more, but that's probably my bias from having grown up with it. Right?
I don't know. We just watched this movie. This movie does not have a lot of heart. Heart is not one of the things I think
they're trying to do the right thing here. It's just it's too busy. They tried to include too much in the movie. Yeah. So the intentions are right. It's just too many cooks in the kitchen.
Well, I think that's another unforced error, because you could start with a smaller cast and grow the cast over time, a la Marvel, right? But they're like, well, look at Marvel. Look at all these characters. But by the way, like, you can point to. I can point to a recent example. Falcon Winter Soldier has tons of characters. There's so many characters in that, and they jump around. It's too bit. Part of that whole season is too busy. Specifically for me, about episode 3 is where it's like, man, it's like mile a minute. Like, we're just different place all the time, different characters. What's going on? And it's like, let's take a second to breathe. We've always said we've appreciated the moments, in Avengers, where it's just like a character moment. Those are often the best moments or most memorable moments when, they're all hanging around trying to lift Thor's hammer, for instance. That's the stuff that's good, and then we seem to see it. This is why it's so confusing. As an audience member, or as critics, we can look at these movies and say, man, it seems pretty clear Spider-Man 3, you put too much stuff in this movie, and it didn't have to be like that. Like, why is Sandman here? Speaking of Spider-Man 3. So this movie could have probably done with fewer characters and probably would have been better off for it, I would say. And it seems weird to me that the studios keep making the same mistake. It's like more every time they did it with DC. Maybe it's just Warner Brothers that's making this mistake. I don't know. But it seems like they did it with the Justice League stuff and the lead up to the Justice League stuff, and they're doing it now here with Mortal Kombat. It's like, again, unforced errors. It's weird to me. I don't know. Jeremy, what do you think?
What's the question exactly again?
Well, the question, if we can back up, the question was, is this going to be a cult?
Oh, right. Yeah, I think you guys hit on all the points we kind of all share, and I think the answer is, I guess, no, but it's not really designed that way. It's designed with the Marvel, architecture in mind. So I think any sequel to this movie is just gonna completely stomp on this one. Like, it's just it's there to set up the world. It's an appetizer, and our expectations for some people really like the game. I think we just come off as disappointed. You know what I mean? Not necessarily like upset or do another reboot or cancel this. I don't think that's the feeling here. But I think in terms of cult, I think it could get it could still hold that as more movies come out. Yeah. But as it stands, I feel like it's basically on the same level as the first sequel, Annihilation, in terms of its of what it achieves and its goal. But I think it's obviously better than that movie. but again, it just comes down to for me, the tone and sense of adventure and mystery that the first one in the games, gave me as you kind of explore it more. And this one just, it knows what it wants to do. It gives us that, but it's just not enough time, and it just comes off clunky that way. But
Yeah.
if you can still have fun with it for sure. So
Yeah.
that's pretty much it.
You're absolutely. I think you hit on. Yeah, I agree. A lot of that same stuff. I mean, this movie, its pacing is all over the place, but I think one of its biggest faults is maybe you're way ahead of the characters for a lot of the time, or at least you're like ahead of Jackson and Sonya and Cole, like all these characters that are supposed to be like the quote unquote audience surrogates. You as the audience member have so much more knowledge than them, and you spend so much time with them learning when you're like, you just want them to just get to the place where you know that they can get to, which I think is frustrating. It's a really tough balance to strike. Lots of movies make this mistake, and it's not always necessarily a mistake, because giving knowledge to the audience ahead of the characters, it can sometimes be rewarding in its own way. But I think with these types of movies, it's not as interesting, because there's not really a big mystery here. Like you're not really. Like they kind of lay it out all at the beginning.
Yeah.
And you get at the end and you really don't really know what happened, and that's all fine because you had a time, but it's a little inconsistent throughout, and disappointed. Jeremy is such a good word. I'm not angry.
Yeah.
I'm not upset.
I mean,
just disappointed.
the trailer is unbelievable. Like just with the imagination and knowing, what this world is, and just how tight that trailer is and how exciting it looks, the music and everything. It's like, we were just so hyped on it. And it just didn't play out that way. But, definitely excited to see where it could go if it's planned that way, right? If that's just their goal, no matter how well it's received or whatever, they're just gonna keep it going.
Yeah, just give me the sequels.
I think, at this point, it's like this will be the gritty, kind of like low budget entryway that people will be like in a couple of years will be like, you could go watch the first movie, but don't really need to. You can probably just watch the second one and you'll be fine. Catch up to what's going on. If that's what happens, I think that's the best case scenario, by the way, for this movie. In a lot of ways, that it's like it's like fun to go back and see where where they kind of rebooted it all, but you might not need to see it if you're kind of like, once we have 4 movies and this one is like the first of 4, you're like, oh, just watch the 3. We'll see. We'll see.
It's like Fast and Furious.
Yeah, you can skip Tokyo Drift, but actually don't, because that movie's sweet. So, well, actually, and you should watch the first one, I think, if you're watching the Fast and Furious.
Yeah.
I think you should probably watch the first one. Yeah. Or I don't know. Do you think you could jump to Fast 5? Isn't that like the big reboot for Fast and Furious? That was like when they kind of like came back and were like, we got it, we've done it, we figured it out. It's heist movies. That's the secret, or at least for that one. I don't know. We're actually pretty close to the next Fast 9.
Whichever one it is. I
The
mean,
newest
they're
one.
at the
July.
point where all you need to know about those movies going in is the trailer, right? Like they're just action movies now. You don't need to know about all the whole family stuff.
Right.
All you
They
need to know
steered
is
away
about
from that,
family.
right?
It's superheroes, and their superpower is that they've got family. And it's so much so, not only is it family, so it's so family that the bad guys are all related to each other.
and them half the time.
And also to them. Yeah, that's true. Okay, so we can wrap it up there. You can find us on Twitter at Tower Babblecast, Facebook.com/Tower Babblecast. Head over to our website, TowerBabblePodcast.com or TowerBabble.ca to find everything we do. You can support the show by heading over to Patreon.com/Tower Babblecast. And for as little as $5 a month, we do a film club. Dan, tell the folks at home what we'll be doing.
We're doing Armageddon this month.
Armageddon
and Deep Impact.
Right. If only have to watch Armageddon, but bonus credits if you do watch Deep Impact as well. And also, Dan, what was that other one that just came out? Iceland. If you get that one in there too, Greenland, then you're really gonna be striking gold. Okay. Anyway, we'll be recording that pretty soon. It's already the 25th. Yeah. We'll be recording that pretty soon before the end of the month, and you can get access to that on the Patreon, as well as all of our previous Film Club installments there as well. And we'll be back next week. We'll talk about the finale to Falcon and the Winter Soldier. We'll talk about all the latest in the news. By the way, do you guys know there's a Captain America 4 coming? there's Captain America 4 coming out.
Right.
So
Can't wait.
we'll talk about that next week, and we'll talk to you then.